What is up, team? Killchain here, and today we are looking at Slayer and Arms. We've already looked at how Fury likes Slayer as a hero talent combination. The pinned comment down below will have that as well. Do a bit of a PSA, I suppose. Do check your clients to see if you've gotten any alpha access yet. They've been releasing in waves more to public. Jump into alpha and check it out. As you can see, I still don't have it, but it's fine. The bench is very, very warm, and I'm keeping it nice and toasty for everyone. But by all means, good luck and check that out. Now, first things first, a quick recap for Slayer Hero Talent section itself. We know that your abilities will have this stacking marked for execution debuff that then funnels into execute doing more damage. You'll have imminent demise, specifically also then increasing the chance for sudden death to proc, giving you a free execute, right? And part and parcel of that as well is that then feeds into Bladestorm, where Bladestorm will have additional ticks during the set duration. So if it's a 6-second duration with, say, 6 ticks all told, then you'll actually be getting something like 9 ticks in that same 6-second duration. So it amps up how many ticks and how quickly each one is coming in. That's really important. That feeds into your overwhelmed debuff, which just naturally increases your own damage on the target. Useful, obviously, in both AoE and single target as well there. Also, Phonetic Flurry, this will work in tandem with Imminent Demise, whereby your overpowers will have a chance to proc this little mini Bladestorm that does extra damage, but that also can consume your Imminent Demise stacks as well from sudden death procs, which means that your one little mini Bladestorm that procs from Phonetic Flurry can actually tick 4 rounds of damage instead of 1. They have confirmed that with the blue post, so that's really cool too. Now, all this feeds back into your capstone as well, whereby your executes then that consume that marked for execution debuff from the top tier. This will then feed back into giving your Bladestorm some cooldown reduction, and it helps apply additional stacks of your overwhelmed debuff to make sure you keep it at your max 10 stacks, which increases your personal damage by 10% for 20 seconds. So that's pretty good. You'll be Bladestorming probably every 20 seconds, so you should be able to maintain that buff pretty comfortably, or at least some version of that buff uptime, because between your actual Bladestorm, the amount of cooldown reduction you get, as well as proccing these little free random Phonetic Flurry Bladestorms, it should be up more often than it's not, like probably a 70% uptime-ish sort of thing on that particular buff, and this helps along with that as well. It is important to note that you'll be double dipping on cooldown reduction, so while Bladestorm has a baseline of 1.5 minutes, you're getting decent CDR from Unrelenting Onslaught, and then really good CDR from Anger Management as well, both feeding into the same playback loop, right? Of just getting Bladestorm to be really, really, really short, which will be really good for keys and things. Every pack, you're going to have Bladestorm up and available as well. So that's the general consensus of how the Slayer tree works. Now to some of the concerns. So first things first, for some of the things to be aware of in Arms tree as a whole, but how that interacts with Slayer specifically, is we've had a lot of rage generation nerf. Now this was sort of needed. We had pretty much all permanent rage the entirety of, especially just later seasons into Dragonflight. That's what really pushed the heavy emphasis on Test of Might and the anger management loop, where you're just always spending all the rage. They had to literally pull off Ignore Pain from providing benefit to Test of Might for that specific reason. We had so much rage, we were using a defensive ability on cooldown just for how it synergized with Test of Might. I've written down some notes over the side. We're going to run over all the rage regen nerfs that have happened. We have Frothing Berserker, so this bad boy on the class side of the tree. The amount that it will refund is now been nerfed. Shockwave no longer grants any rage at all. We actually didn't have access to Shockwave previously as an Arms Warrior for Mythic Plus purposes or anything, whereas in terms of pathing and everything, it's much nicer now. As part and parcel of all these rage nerfs, overwhelming rage almost becomes sort of not really needed, because your own rage generation is going to struggle to hit 100, let alone 130. But there's not really much else you can put it in, right? You could probably afford to maybe pick up Bitter Immunity, which we're not used to normally having. There's no pathway down here, so that's your biggest problem. You either put them in Slam, which you're never going to hit, or you put them in Overwhelming Rage, which is just kind of pointless because of all the rage regen nerfs, right? So this is a problem here as well. Champion Spear also had its rage generation nerfed. Again, typically more of a single target problem than in Mythic Plus. However, we'll talk about why that could potentially shift as well. Thunderous Roar doesn't generate any rage anymore, and the Overpower rage gen from Strength of Arms has been split, so this is now a choice node with Dreadnought. But the Strength of Arms used to also do what Finishing Blows does, right? But now it's a 2 talent point investment to get the same benefit if you still want Overpower to help generate rage in execute phase. Rage generation nerf in general is just compounded even more whenever you are in execute phase for that exact reason, because you're just sending massive, retarded, huge executes, right, that are consuming all the rage. The auto attacks from rage generation has been reduced. I think it's about 16%. Actually, I can literally just swing over here. We're doing it live, team. We're doing it live. Where is it? I knew I saw it somewhere. Auto attacks, yeah, 16%. So that's pretty, I guess, noticeable in some capacity, right? Like, it's a thing. Warlord's Torment, I actually had to reread this because I didn't realize how much of a problem this was, but Warlord's Torment is the capstone choice node affecting Avatar, whereby you get Recklessness. However, the Warlord's Torment only is from Avatar now. It no longer grants it from Colossus Smash, losing the amount of Recklessness we're going to get throughout a fight. But not only that, this is the real rough one. The rage generation granted by the Recklessness has been reduced by 75%. It used to give you 100% increased rage gen, and now it's only 25%. So that's a huge nerf to Warlord's Torment, which then makes you go, well, do you really still want double Blade Storm? Is this choice node even worth it anymore? Because that's quite a hefty nerf, but you also just wouldn't want Blade Master's Torment. That's always like a bit of a janky situation. And then, hey, that gives you an extra point to play with, I guess. But, yeah. You're probably still going to pick it up because it's worth it when it is worth it, right? But huge effective nerf on Warlord's Torment that not many people have mentioned thus far. Battle Lord. So this bad boy no longer triggers rage either, whereas previously when it did trigger, it would give you some rage on that regard. And then lastly, Blade Storm itself doesn't provide any rage there. So all told, we're looking around 8 to 9 different individual circumstances of rage generation nerf. It is important to note that there are a lot of abilities that have also had their rage costs reduced. It is still very much a net negative though. So you can see it from streams, and once you guys get in the alpha yourselves as well, you really do feel it. There's definitely some GCDs where you haven't had anything to hit because of rage issues. But time will tell, because this is only using sort of starter gear. We don't know what it's going to be like when we're all maxed out on the gear side of things. By the time we have all the new gems and, yeah, amping all that kind of stuff up, it will be interesting to see where that pivots us and lands ultimately at the end of the tier. But first impressions is, yeah, the rage generation is definitely noticeable. Let's just put it that way. And it's still a net negative in that regard. This kind of rage change as well really is to touch on Test of Might as well, because although they're reducing the rage generation, by reducing the cost of rage as well, it puts less emphasis on Test of Might as a playstyle, because the whole point is you want to be spending lots and lots and lots of rage. Even things like Storm of Swords, that used to increase the cost of Whirlwind, whereas now it doesn't have anything to do with the cost. It doesn't even provide a 14-second internal cooldown anymore. It just allows you, yeah, full redesign just gives you free Whirlwinds, which is the direct opposite of costing rage, is, yeah, giving it to you for free on a chance. So that really puts Test of Might sort of on the back burner. The other flip side is there's been Thunderous Word. So next is sort of looking at exactly how there's this dichotomy within arms where it's like bleed versus no bleed. So you'll notice specifically with this build, I haven't done any of the bleed. You might have been like, why the fuck doesn't he have Rend? There's no Thunderclap going on. What's going on here? This is insane. And the main part is that there's around 9 talents that all involve bleeds, maybe even 10. I think there's 9 or 10. And that kind of pivots you into how deep down the bleed rabbit hole do you want to go, because it is exceptionally difficult to get any of a sort of bleed build rolling while maintaining any presence in single target. So the most notable one here is all the pathing. The pathing is the main issue with this shuffle around. We can't just skip directly from Blade Storm into Sharpened Blades and EP anymore. There's more point investment here now, which is quite brutal. They seem to have this obsession with Warriors, and I'm sure other classes have it as well, but I'm going to complain because I can. critical thinking, deft experience, friggin' armor to the teeth, wild strikes, and cruel strikes. They all are still 2-point nodes that are just literally hamstringing the shit out of our trees, and it's really frustrating. Just make them 1 point, please, for the love of God. Stop being so restrictive. So this is the problem. It helps sort of bridge that gap. You can see for the most part, this is my no bleed angle build, which you're going to be triggered by seeing Champion Spear as a thing for Mythic Plus and stuff like that, right? Like obviously in single target, in raids, it's going to be really good. That'll probably synergize quite nicely with things like your Tunnel Vision, where if you know it's a single target boss fight, you're going to be on him for 5 minutes straight, then cool. Free 20% attack speed, that'll be fine. It is important to know as well, though, that Thrill of the Kill, if you're getting a execute anywhere in the realm of like 10 to 12 seconds, so like your sudden death proc means you can at least pull off and execute all that time. Yes, 30% increase auto attack speed is clearly better than 20% increase auto attack speed. So this is really weird. I think most of the time you're just going to run Thrill of the Kill regardless. Either way, I digress. The whole point is that will help in terms of, you know, more auto attacks, more rage gen in that regard to help bridge this gap. But the prominent issue is that Champion Spear is now becoming more and more prevalent of a potential in even Mythic Plus, where you just need to start learning how to be really smart about where you position and drop your spears and communicate with your tank and things like that. And then it's just going to be really difficult on things like Sanguine Week, right? Where you just sort of shit out of luck regardless. But the big issue here is that Thunderous Words has been nerfed, whereby the increase to bleeds is no longer wrapped up as a 15% damage increase all the time for all of your bleeds. It only increases your damage by, yes, 30%, so it's a nice buff, but during the duration of Thunderous Roar bleed buff, which as you can see, it'll last 8 seconds. So you have 8 seconds where all your bleeds do more damage by 30%, right? That's just completely gutted any sort of bleed build, right? Which means what's the point of running Thunderclap and Rend, or your other bleed talents like Bloodletting and Bloodborne? That change where you're putting a lot of emphasis on bleeds within that short window does give a hell of a lot of more value to things like Skull Splitter. But again, you start realizing that if just by saying the word bleed build, there's suddenly 10 talents that come into your radar, being Thunderclap, you need that to then proc your AoE Rend, which means you also need Rend, that's 2. Blood and Thunder is what allows that interaction to happen, so that's 3 talents. You've got Thunderous Roar and Thunderous Words, that's 4, 5, maybe even 6 if you get Uproar as well, because the more Thunderous Roars you get because it's a shorter cooldown, the more times and opportunities you have to get this weird bleed interaction with Thunderous Words now, where you've got this bleed window where you care about it. So that becomes like far more valuable as well. And then just Bloodborne is already a 2-point talent down into Bloodletting, that's 3. And all this funnels into Blood Surge as well, whereby all your bleed effects have that chance to give you some more rage. And this could be the caveat, right? You might still need something as simple as just Rend and just Thunderclap and just Blood and Thunder to have one more bleed rotating on everything in Mythic Plus, just to help with rage issues. So hopefully that doesn't become the case, but if we can avoid bleeds altogether, this is probably some sort of a build that we're cooking with. The whole playstyle in terms of AoE still allows you to path down to execution precision like we know and love for single target reasons, which is really important because you obviously want to have a comfortable dichotomy between the two damage profiles. Whereas in terms of AoE, you're going to have really short blade storms thanks to both anger management and the unrelenting onslaught, which is freaking awesome. That funnels directly into hurricanes, right? Which also has a really good synergy with the change to Merciless Bone Grinder, Stormer Swords, and the fact that we can get both Stormer Swords and collateral damage now means that we can throw out a Sweeping Strike. That's going to build up this nice girthy Whirlwind and Cleave combo. And the change with Stormer Swords now means that there's no internal cooldown that's been increased to 14 seconds. You basically get 9 seconds to go absolutely ham and pump out as many Whirlwinds as you possibly can. Really cool, because this gives you a potential chance at free Whirlwinds. The Merciless Bone Grinder also is now affected by Cleave, as is collateral damage itself as well. So that means your next Cleave or Whirlwind. Do keep in mind, it does say or. So unfortunately, if you have a collateral damage buff, you need to then decide, are you going to use it on the cleave or the whirlwind? So for the most part, you're probably always going to pick the whirlwind, right? There's more damage amps involved with the hard hitting whirlwind than there is for cleave at the moment. But it is very close. The whole point is that window is still worthwhile hitting both, right? So ideally you can pick it up and you have the talent point to do so it's not so bad, honestly. But you do need to factor in that if rage is still an issue, there is a potential where you're relying solely on deep wounds as the bleed to give you a little bit of damage back. So your blade storm, things like that, will obviously be proccing deep wounds and everything. Cleave also applies deep wounds, right? So just that alone means that maybe you might need to pitch out of cleave and go into blood surge just for the deep wounds rage increase. So that's a decision you sort of need to make. But this is your bleed based, or non-bleed based build. So I digress. And so this is probably going to be something you're cooking with, right? I really don't like Champion Spear in Mythic Plus. That's probably going to concern me the most out of this, but I think that's just going to be your best bang for your buck. In saying that, we do want to look on the flip side for an actual bleed-based build this time, where you're really funneling into that blood surge and all that stuff. You could pull a couple of potential points out, but in terms of the bare minimums, you obviously need Thunderclap and therefore Blood and Thunder to spread the rend, which means you also need rend. Going this route obviously pivots you down into Thunderous Roar and Thunderous Word, so they're like a bare minimum 5 talents that you really need. And then you're pulling away from Bloodletting and Bloodborne and things like that. So if you still wanted to path down into EP to give you some sort of single target profile, you pull out a Bloodletting, pull out a Bloodborne if you really wanted to as well, and you still then need to dip out of Skull Splitter to go down into EP. That gives you Blood Surge still. That gives you the rend AoE to get much more rage flow going to help in that regard. But yeah, without having Thunderous Words apply 15% damage to increase to bleeds all the time, you're really sort of lacking a lot on the bleed front, just in terms of the damage amps available, where it's hurting you a lot. I just don't see this bleed build being as viable. You don't have the synergy with Merciless Bone Grinder and all the Whirlwind stuff anymore, which means you also don't give a flying fuck about Seismic Reverb or whereas the other one, the Barbaric Training, that synchronizes really well with allowing Whirlwinds after Blade Storms, right? So you just physically don't need it anymore. So those points pivot into things like your Thunderclap and Blood and Thunder instead. But you need some sort of AoE, so yeah, you pick up Cleave with Merciless Bone Grinder as well. Potentially, do you dip out of Cleave entirely and then use that to go into all your points that you wanted? So you can still pick up Blade Storm and Hurricane. You can then still path down, so you might need to get rid of Bloodletting, for example. Yeah, you can get some extra bleed damage out that way, but you're sort of starting to see that there's too much of a tug of war between this idea of bleeds and feeding into the Slayer playstyle, where, yeah, you kind of just shit out of luck, honestly. I think a non-bleed build is the way that we're going to move forward, especially with such prevalent synchronizations with Seismic Reverb, Barbaric Training, Merciless Bone Grinder, Storm of Swords, and Collateral Damage all into this Whirlwind. The fact that we can spam it now going to be really good, and I think the choice is really just going to come down to whether or not we pick up Blood Surge purely for deep wounds, just to get some sort of help on Rage Gem. All told, I mean, it works comfortably well with Slayer. I do think this will be at least the primary one that we might look at for raid bosses and things like that, just because of its execute damage profile. Whereas Colossus really does compete quite well with that. So that's the toss-up where that's going to boil down to things, right? So that being said, Slayer arms, not bad. Some concerns. Hopefully Rage Gen isn't too impactful. If it's not, then we can afford to move ourselves away from a bleed-based playstyle. But time will tell. Let me know what you guys think down below. And yeah, I'm curious to see how our look over on the Colossus and Mountain Thane trees goes as well, so keep an eye on them. Thanks very much for watching, and I'll catch you guys in the next video. Peace.